Hello, and here we are again. We're going to talk about the ways of prayer. I had a mystical experience about this last night, and I want to talk about this. So before we go into this, let me just point out again, thank you all who are members here. Thank you so much. You are making it possible for us to continue our work. And so we ask all of you who are subscribers, all of you who are just watching the channel, to consider becoming a member. Definitely, we ask that you subscribe. And if you're interested in becoming a member, please click on the join button, and you can join from anywhere as low as $1.99 a month to $49.99 a month. And there are a lot of perks that you can get from this, primarily with some spiritual counseling and things like this. And this is how we are supporting some of our work. So we appreciate it very much. So again, welcome everyone. And please feel free to jump in the chat room, make any comments you'd like, or ask any questions you'd like. We are going to talk about the ways of prayer. And we're doing this because it's so important that we understand why these different forms of prayer are helpful in our practice to achieve out-of-body travel or mystical experiences, but also understanding how they work differently and why they are all of a powerful nature that we want to embrace. Because when we are looking to achieve out-of-body travel, we are looking at a series of efforts that we will make, practices that we will bring into our daily life so that we can create a certain circular wholeness in that practice that makes these types of things more likely to occur and more beneficial towards those goals of, moving closer and closer to God in those kinds of things. And so a couple of things I want to touch on. I'm going to go into some text here. The power of prescribed prayer and the power of conversation with God, and certain things about understanding the power of other types of prayer, like, for instance, the liturgy of the hours. And then I want to bring in something else, but we're going to do that near the end. These are the 3 points that were shown to me to be of importance in today's live stream to talk about in the mystical experience that I had about this. So I want to just talk about it a little bit, and then I want to dive deeper. So one of the things that is so important to understand is that there are different forms of prayer that we engage in. For many of us on a daily basis, for many of us at different times or different days. The prescribed prayer, we have these 3 types of prayer that I was shown in particular that we need to discuss. Prescribed prayer, conversational prayer, and understanding more the power of the liturgy of the hours. So what is prescribed prayer? Prescribed prayer are like the Catholic prayers that are, and Christian prayers like the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Apostles' Creed, St. Michael's prayer. The one thing that we do know and we see, and it's interesting too, because when I talk to my spiritual counseling clients, I hear about their experiences with these things as well. We know that in the mystical spheres, certain prescribed prayers like the Our Father, the Apostles' Creed, actually have the power to drive out demonic forces. So I'm just going to pause there a second because I want you to think about that. So understanding like that first stanza of the Our Father, when you are under spiritual attack, has the power to force demons out. And ironically, I was speaking with a client this week who shared with me their own experience with the Our Father when this person was under demonic persecution, and how, just as in the experiences that I describe in my books, the demonic force was just pushed out, gone, obliterated. You know what I'm saying? And in the experiences that I had, reciting the Apostles' Creed in the presence of a contaminated soul had the ability to exorcise them of the contaminations. Reciting the Our Father is basically an exorcism prayer. And why does it work? In part because we are calling down God's kingdom down into this earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so there is a power to prescribed prayer. A lot of people have comments that they'll make about, well, it says not to be repetitious in the Bible. And it does, it says that. But we see that in the mystical spheres, that there is power to these prescribed prayers, the Hail Mary, the St. Michael prayer, all of these things. They have these certain types of mystical powers that are granted to them when you are in the out-of-body travel state. So we just accept that. It just is. So that's important. That tells us, really important, that we understand those prescribed prayers have that power. But then let's move to the second, which is the conversational prayers. Because one of the things that we see, ironically, let's just take Catholics and Protestants as an example to make this point. In the Catholic tradition, one of the foibles can be that a person may be more likely to pray the prescribed prayers, but not necessarily engage in the conversational. Whereas one of the possible pitfalls in Protestantism could be the opposite. They're more likely to engage in these conversational prayers, but they don't necessarily engage in the prescribed prayers as much. So what we find, and what I have found and what I've written about in my books, is this conversational prayer, this dialogue with God that we carry on in our hearts, minds, and spirits throughout every day. And this idea goes back to the very beginning. St. Paul said, pray without ceasing. And in the Orthodox tradition, the Philokalia, the writings of the early Desert Fathers, they did this with the Jesus prayer. And this again is another prescribed prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And you could pray that, and you can, and I do that, in your heart and your mind as you're going about your daily duties. But conversational prayer has a similar intention and purpose, which is that you are creating that praying without ceasing, that constant communication with God from your soul to the throne room of God. And by so doing, you're fulfilling a few different things. For one, you're fulfilling, and I want you to remember this when I talk about the Liturgy of the Hours, you're fulfilling this circular motion. Excuse me. This circular motion from heaven to earth, which is the prayer of the angels. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, because that circular motion is also fulfilled in part by the Liturgy of the Hours. But in this conversational nature, what else are we fulfilling that could be important in seeking out-of-body experiences? Well, we have several things that Christ told us. He said, ask and it will be given. seek, and you will find. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for coming into the chat room. And we will answer your question in a minute. Knock, and the door shall be opened to you. So I want to go through that again real quick. Ask, and it will be given. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and the door shall be opened. So ask, seek, knock. All of these are active actions that we are being requested by our Lord to engage within. And what do these remind me of? Well, for me, I immediately go back to the old Zen koan that I refer to frequently, which is the master in the pool of water with the disciple. And the disciple says, well, when will I achieve enlightenment? The master pushes his head under the water. He's flailing for air. And in a few seconds later, he lets him back up. And the master says, you will find enlightenment when your desire for enlightenment is as strong as your desire a moment ago was for breath itself. And so there's a similarity between this and the admonition of Christ saying, ask, seek, and knock. And in all three instances, he says that when we do this, it will be given to you. And so our conversational prayer becomes this beautiful blossoming of asking, seeking, and knocking. It's developing this beautiful movement from earth to heaven, because we are engaging in continual prayer with God, praying without ceasing. And so then we go to this third aspect of the mystical experience I had last night, which is to discuss the power of prayers like the Liturgy of the Hours. And again, I asked you to remember this so that you could see what I'm going to point out here. So when you're dealing with the Liturgy of the Hours, and for those who are interested in understanding this to a deeper level, I suggest you go download The Primordial Seed. It's a book I wrote on this very subject, and it will really blow your mind in terms of what we have from ancient sacred texts to show us these things. But we find that the prayers of the angels are circular in fashion. They move from heaven to earth, and the angels pray the prayer of the hours. They pray the prayer of the hours. We find this in ancient sacred texts. We also find that Adam and Eve, at the time of the garden, the primordial garden, we have references made to the fact that Adam could no longer hear the prayer of the angels after the fall. Before the fall, he could hear the prayer of the angels. And so what is this Liturgy of the Hours? What is this liturgical prayer that was actually started in Judaism from the very beginning? It's this mysterious way that God brought to us to restore that prayer of the hours. So when we're praying the Liturgy of the Hours, we are joining in prayer with the angels. We're also joining in prayer with every living soul who also prays it. In the Catholic Church, all religious, priests, monks, nuns, they pray the Liturgy of the Hours every day. Welcome, Deb Cassie. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, Andrew. And so what we're doing with the Liturgy of the Hours, we're actually like reinstituting, rejoining this prayer. So you can see with these three prayers that we are talking about, the prescribed prayer, the conversational prayer, and prayers like the Liturgy of the Hours. Different faiths have different manifestations of that. We are all working towards this circular motion. We want to get into that momentum. And it's by being into this momentum that the out of body experiences can arise and often do arise. But it is also here where we become more at one with it. Let me answer Andrew's questions, and then we're going to go a little deeper here with a couple of texts I've picked out for all of you. Is the rosary just as effective if you do it without your rosary? Absolutely. The rosary, the physical rosary, is a tool. It's an aid that helps you to count the prayers. And so absolutely, it is just as effective. On the other hand, as a sacramental, and sacramentals are things like crucifixes, rosaries, holy water. Rosary is a sacramental. And so having a rosary, oftentimes talk about wrapping a rosary around your hand when you go off to sleep, is a form of protection. It will provide you with certain protections in the mystical world. And so the rosary is a tool, but it does have sacramental value. Andrew says, great analogy with the breathing. Yes. I can't take credit for that. That goes to the Zen masters. We cannot exist without air. We cannot find true peace without a relationship with God. Very much so. Yes. And welcome, Aniel. What about repeating a mantra with God's name in meditation? That would also serve a similar purpose. And ironically, I would direct you to read my latest book, The Lord of the Redemption, to really deeply understand the power, redemptive sanctification power in the repetition of God's holy names. So take a look at the Lord of the Redemption. We see it in not just Christianity. We see it in Hinduism, in Buddhism. It's very fascinating what we find there. And so let's take a little side angle here, just because I want to take it a little bit deeper. So starting here with just the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Says here in part 2 of the Catholic Church, in the symbol of the faith, the Church confesses the mystery of the Holy Trinity and of the plan of God's good pleasure for all creation. The Father accomplishes the mystery of his will by giving his beloved Son and his Holy Spirit for the salvation of the world and the glory of his name. Such is the mystery of Christ, revealed and fulfilled in history according to the wisely ordered plan that St. Paul calls the plan of the mystery, and the patristic tradition will call the economy of the word incarnate, or the economy of salvation. Through his word, God speaks to man. By words, mental or vocal, our prayer takes flesh. Yet it is most important that the heart should be present to him to whom we are speaking in prayer. Whether or not our prayer is heard depends on the number of words. Depends not, my bad, on the number of words, but on the fervor of our souls. That's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Andrew says, read that book and was moved by not only saying God's name, but loving him as you say his name. Yes, that is one of the things that comes from the Lord of the Redemption. Anna Yell, Andrew, this is how I do my prayers. I love it. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the ways of prayer then, and going deeper with that a little bit. So when we speak of the doctrinal theology, methodology on this subject as well, and I just want to touch on a few things in here to give you an overview, because what is that there are many forms of prayer, and just like you're talking about, Aniel, again, here is another beautiful form of prayer, the mantra, the repetition of God's holy name. There's several different kinds of prayer that are often discussed in theology. And so start here. And this is a book called The Ways of Mental Prayer by Dom Vitalis Lehode, Lehdey. It's a masterpiece if you're interested. In its widest sense, prayer is an elevation of the soul to God. This formula, borrowed from St. John Damascene, has become classical. The soul, therefore, leaves aside the useless thoughts, the nothings, the frivolities, which too often invade it. It abandons the thoughts which are good at another time, such as all questions of business, of work, of office. It raises itself above the earth and the things of the earth. Its mind and its affections ascend to heaven. They stop not even at the choirs of angels and of saints, unless indeed our prayer is directly addressed to them. They ascend even to God. They rest in God. Ascensus in Deum. There, fixed in God, we look affectionately at God. As you're talking about, Aniel, we enter, and Andrew, you mentioned that as well. We enter into conversation with God, and God deigns to listen to us with love, as a father to his children, and to reply to us by granting us interior lights and affections. Oh, to what a height does prayer raise the soul, and what an honor it is for a being sprung from nothing. So let's talk about vocal prayer versus mental prayer. And we kind of touched on that a little bit already, but let's see what Catholic theology says about it. Leaving aside whatever belongs not to our present subject, we will confine ourselves to saying that prayer is divided into vocal. Vocal prayer is that which is made by using words or signs, or perhaps more exactly by using some approved form of words which we read or recite, such as the divine office, the beads, the angelus, grace before and after meals, etc. Mental prayer is that which is made without employing either words or formulas of any kind. A large share is given to the former in our daily church. By our rules also we are enjoined certain vocal prayers, and others, like the Holy Rosary, are in such constant use amongst the faithful generally that a good religious would not wish to omit them. Vocal prayer is not to be despised, for if well made, it pays to God the homage of our body as well as that of our soul. A heart full of devotion pours itself out quite naturally in words and signs which express externally its interior sentiments. On the other hand, when there is need to excite such sentiments, these pious formulas fix the attention of the mind and call forth the devotion of the heart. It is for this reason, says St. Thomas, we must in private prayer make use of these words and signs as far as they are useful to arouse the mind interiorly. But if they should end by distracting it or causing it any hindrance, we must cease to make use of them. And this is the case, especially of those whose mind is sufficiently prepared for devotion without these external impressions. So you see, there are stages of prayer. There are different forms of prayer, and each of us will move back and forth into different types of prayer throughout our life, depending on what works for us at any given time. And so here it says, mental prayer in general is an interior and silent prayer by which the soul raises itself to God without the aid of words or formulas, in order to discharge its duty towards Him and to become better. There is ordinary mental prayer and mystical mental prayer. In other terms, active prayer and passive prayer. Interesting, huh? So prayer, like every other meritorious act, requires God's grace and man's cooperation, but sometimes the soul's effort is more manifest, and sometimes the divine action is more manifest. When they're talking like this, they're talking about the consolations, that sometimes we are, through discipline, even in periods of dryness, continuing to pray, and that might be where our action is more manifest. Whereas when we are experiencing the consolations of God, we feel the Holy Spirit when we're praying. That's when the divine action becomes more manifest. So let us then move on to this next type. So then you have three other different types. We have meditation, effective prayer, and the prayer of simplicity in Catholic theology. And so let's just get some basic ideas of what these are. And again, you can always study them in more depth. And if you want to, you can find this book, The Ways of Mental Prayer by Reverend Dom Vitalis Lehode, and study it in depth. The prayer of meditation is a mental prayer composed of considerations, affections, petitions, and resolutions. So that tells us quite a bit. It is called simply mental prayer because it is the portion of a very great number and the first stage in ways of mental prayer. It is called also meditation, discursive prayer, prayer of reasoning, on account of the important part which considerations have in it, and to indicate that the mind proceeds therein not by a simple look, but by the roundabout ways of reasoning. Let us note first that all the parts of mental prayer or meditation ought to converge to one single end: the destruction of a vice, the acquisition of a virtue, or some spiritual practice which may serve as a means to this. We should occupy ourselves chiefly about our predominant sin or vice, about some fundamental virtue, or some more essential practice. Our subject, our considerations, our affections, and petitions should be chosen and regulated in view of this one subject. Very interesting, huh? So then, take a quick look at effective prayer. So, to be acquainted with meditation alone, whose method we have just explained, and we just did a very quick summary. There is a lot of pages in here about that, so you can get that full explanation if you want. Would be regrettable. As time goes on and we make progress, we shall feel drawn to a more simple form of prayer, in which the mind begins to be silent in order to let the heart speak. St. John of the Cross and St. Francis of Sales, it is true, mention only meditation and contemplation, while St. Teresa includes under what she calls the first water all kinds of non-mystical prayer. Meditation in their idea comprises all kinds of active prayer, whether it consists in much reasoning or in only a slight amount, or be content with almost a simple look. Ironically, when I read that, it reminds me of what Mother Teresa would say, which is she said, sometimes my prayer is simply, I look at Jesus and he looks at me. That is what they're referring to when they say a simple look. Hence it is that when the soul is no longer sufficiently occupied in contemplation, these masters of the contemplative life invite it to return to meditation, to some of the forms of active prayer, in order that it may not remain idle. But the general practice is to admit between these two extremes at least one intermediate degree, which is namely effective prayer. This latter, at first, allows a rather large space to considerations. In the sequel, it diminishes more and more the work of the mind and ends by being reduced to hardly more than a simple look. In the beginning, it is merely a simplified and more rapid sort of meditation. Later on, it becomes an active contemplation. It passes, therefore, through somewhat different phases, which require different rules for their directions. On this account, we shall follow those authors who make two subdivisions of it, namely effective prayer and the prayer of simplicity. An effective prayer, as we understand it, is that which allows less space than meditation does to considerations and more to the affections. So this is where diminishes the work of the mind, without, however, suppressing it. If formerly we gave a quarter of an hour to reasoning and a quarter of an hour to acts of the will, we are now satisfied with 5 minutes of thinking, for example, and the rest of the time is a conversation of the heart with God. Our reflections will be at once more rapid, more effective, and less varied. That gives you kind of an overview of effective prayer. And now we move into the prayer of simplicity. The name prayer of simplicity clearly indicates its nature. The preceding form of prayer had much diminished considerations. This lessens still more the work of the intellect, and gradually comes to be contented with almost a thought, a memory, a glance, with contemplating rather than meditating. And you see this process of how this prayer goes from being more noisy to being more and more quiet, closer and closer to absolute silence. This is the progression of the prayer life. It likewise simplifies the affections. Previously, our acts were complicated, lengthy, and wordy. We used to say, for instance, I love thee with all my heart, thou who hast created, preserved, and redeemed me, thou who hast loaded me with graces and testified so much love for me. But the soul has need of strengthening her acts by their motives in order to maintain herself in affections and to persevere in them. Now these various helps, far from being necessary to her, have become an embarrassment, a fatigue, a check. She prefers to say, my Jesus, I love thee. And thus, by abridging her affections, she makes them in greater number. Very interesting. Then the next stage of prayer is mystical prayer. So, at the website, I have books that I recommend, like The Spiritual Life by Father Adolphe Tanqueray and The 3 Ages of the Interior Life by Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange. These are huge volumes of work that are just masterpieces. And what this interior life is leading to is mystical prayer. And that's where we are right now. The kinds of mental prayer hitherto described have nothing transcendental in them. There is no one who may not practice them by his own soul energy, aided by the ordinary graces of prayer. It remains for us now to supply some guidance to our brethren in ways less known, that is, with regard to mystical contemplation, for which a man can and ought to dispose himself, but into which God alone can introduce him. Amongst all the exercises of Christian piety, we have here, without contradiction, the most efficacious means to detach souls from earth and to unite them to God. It is the school of high virtue, the shortcut to perfection, and the most rapid conveyance to this goal, a pearl of priceless value, a treasure so desirable that a prudent merchant will not hesitate to sell all his goods in order to obtain it. God, who distributes his graces as he wills, and according as each one disposes himself thereto and cooperates therewith, bestows likewise his favors when he pleases, after the manner he pleases, and on whom he pleases. Being master of his goods, he can bestow them thus without wronging anyone. He is not bound to grant us in this world graces, without which we can be saved. If the gift of mystical contemplation is not granted to us, there may be reasons on the part of God who means perhaps to guide us to perfection by another road. And then let's just take a look at one final thing here in this overview on these different forms of prayer. And this is the passage from ordinary prayer to mystical contemplation. Oh, Anna Yell, thank you. This live stream is an answer to prayer. I am honored. And I don't know if you caught, but I will just repeat in case. This live stream was shown to me last night in a mystical experience. I was told to do this, so maybe it was for you. God alone can lead a soul into mystical contemplation. Generally speaking, he waits till souls are sufficiently purified and already rich in virtues, and he always exacts from them a generous correspondence with his favors. Very numerous are they who view the promised land from a distance, but never enter it on account of their infidelities. Let us beware of accusing God in order to excuse our own failings. With regard to the graces of prayer, almost the same thing takes place as with regard to those of the sacraments. Let us open wide the door of our soul, and they rush in copious streams. John says, welcome back, John. I agree, Aniel. This is an extremely important mentoring to me. Thank you, John. I'm very glad to hear that. It is not necessary that a soul should be already perfect before she takes her first steps in these mystical ways. On the contrary, the union of love and passive purifications are most powerful agents to purge the soul and perfect her virtues. But the budding forth of contemplation, its blossoming and its fruits. We have a super chat. Thank you, John. I am so thankful that God is guiding you to guide us. Thank you, Marilynn. You're very welcome. And thank you so much for that super chat. We appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much. I will start that line over so that we can capture it. It is not necessary that a soul should be already perfect before she takes her first steps in these mystical ways. That's important because a lot of people get discouraged because they think they have to be. On the contrary, the union of love and passive purifications are most powerful agents to purge the soul and perfect her virtues. The mystical life itself, the out-of-body experiences, they'll take you into the energetic truth, and then you are changed, transformed through the vibrations, through all of these things that we talk about, because again, knowledge is vibration, right? But the budding forth of contemplation, its blossoming and its fruits depend altogether on the divine pleasure and on the zeal the soul shows in preparing herself and in cooperating with grace. Progress in interior purity and in virtue will give the measure of progress in contemplation. In proportion as the soul is purified and her positive holiness increases, her prayer becomes more elevated. Union with God, having become more intense, hastens in its turn the purification of the soul and its further progress. We should cleanse our interior house, empty it out, give more room to God in it by increasing our life of prayer. We ought also to seek God with more ardor in the practice of virtue, especially of a lively faith and generous love, and of a life of silence, recollection, and prayer. The more our soul is emptied of profane things and becomes a holy sanctuary, the more will it attract the divine guest. Penance will suppress whatever repels infinite purity. The virtues will adorn in a worthy manner the temple of so lofty a majesty. The calm and peace of the sanctuary and the incense of prayer will invite God to honor us with his presence and his intimate friendship. This beginning of a preparation which leads the soul to the threshold of mystical contemplation does not exceed the power of our own efforts, aided by grace. Perhaps God someday, by putting us through special purifications, will deign to complete our preparation and so open up to us the gates of contemplation. So, again, I'd like to just go over the three things that were specified and made important in the mystical experience that I did have last night, which was the importance of understanding the ways that these types of prayer interact. And it was the three types that were specified in my experience. Andrew says, where can we get the Liturgy of the Hours? You recommend we pray this every day. There are copies of the Liturgy of the Hours on Amazon.com, and there are sites online where you can have those daily readings actually sent to your email. So look it up, see if you can find one that will send those to your email. If not, you can always go to those sites and pray that right off the internet. The Liturgy of the Hours is a 4-volume work. It's usually about $150. And so it is a little expensive, but it's 2,000 pages or so in each volume. It's a beautiful, amazing work. Probably the best money you'll ever spend. But so these three areas that were brought up to me mystically was the power of prescribed prayer, the fact that we have the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Apostles' Creed, the St. Michael prayer, the fact that these prayers have been shown through my own experiences and the experiences of the saints and mystics, and even of my own spiritual counseling clients, to have the power to exorcise demons, to purify souls who are lost souls, to assist with souls who are ghosts, to help souls in other circumstances in the heavens, hells, and purgatories. So these prescribed prayers have great power. But we mentioned again, the one thing that can happen is sometimes we focus too much either on prescribed prayers or on conversational prayers when we want to create a wonderful balance of both. And so again, the prescribed prayers have power. They're important. The conversational prayers with God, the kinds we've just been talking about, the ways of mental prayer, those also have a unique quality and power. We want to also have that prayer practice in our routine. And we talked about, and I was shown to discuss the power of the liturgy of the hours. And the power comes from this and from all three forms of prayer that we're talking about and focusing on, with this circular motion between heaven and earth. And again, if you want to understand this more, download the Primordial Seed at outofbodytravel.org, which will explain how the angels pray the prayer of the hours. This goes back to the beginning of time. It was continued in the Jewish tradition, extended and refined in the Catholic tradition. And you'll find this in many religious traditions. So whatever that tradition is in your own faith. Anna Yell says, I had to pray a prayer for Saint Michael, Archangel Michael, last night, very fervently. I can understand that. The ultimate peace descended after that. God answered the prayer. And when you say that, thank you for sharing that, Anna Yell. It indicates that you had some type of urgent need, but you experienced this, where this liberation, this grace comes in, and that is one of those prescribed prayers. But Anna Yell also mentioned earlier in the live stream her mantras in reciting the holy name of God, which is another form of prayer that was actually discussed in great detail in my latest book, The Lord of the Redemption, which is also another form, which you'll see that not only do I recommend that in The Lord of the Redemption, but I'm recommending it because we find in the ancient sacred texts that this is a form of sanctification, redemptive prayer in loving the Lord and reciting his names. And we have Anna Yell. That was such a blessed experience. Thank you for sharing. I agree. Thank you very much. And thank you, John, for your comment about it. And so what I'd like to do is kind of wrap this one up. We're going to have another live stream in just a couple of moments. And this live stream, I will be taking your questions. So I hope you all come back and shoot me your questions, because otherwise I'll have nothing to talk about. On a final note, I wanted to bring out the final aspect of this vision that I was told to discuss, which was a beautiful mystical experience I had actually a few years ago, and it was with my children's great grandmother. And I had been praying very strongly for my children, and she came and showed me my children, and she said that in loving those we love, we pray a very simple prayer. And that prayer is that we love them. By loving them, we are engaging in an act of prayer for them. Sometimes we overcomplicate things. And ironically, we were talking about the effective prayer and the prayer of simplicity, and how we are moving from more complicated, complex prayer into simpler, more silent prayer. what Grandma was saying to me and to all of us was just loving those we love, not necessarily even stressing over whatever the issues may be, the conflicts. Loving, because love is in and of itself is the essence of God. We are blessing them. We are praying for them, and we're doing the same for ourselves. So Anna says, thank you, and holding my hands just like you were doing. I could feel the vibrational raisings. Good job, Anna. So you must have read that in the vibrational state, if you do this with your spiritual hands, you will literally, like 100-fold, maybe 1,000-fold, the vibrations will go. You will increase the vibrations as you are doing that. And so sometimes when I pray, I utilize this as well because I know that it has a vibrational thrust to it. I have to leave now. God bless you. God bless you as well, Anna Yell. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And please come back in just a couple of minutes. I'll start another live stream that will be dedicated to your questions. So thank you for coming. Again, thank you, John, for that fabulous super chat. And thank you all for your great comments and ideas and questions and experiences. It always really helps to make the experience so much fuller, and it's very appreciated. One reminder again, if you want to become a member here, click the join button and check out the options. We really appreciate your memberships because they make the Out of Body Travel Foundation's work possible. We try to make everything we have available for free to everyone in the world. And memberships on our YouTube channel are one way that we do that. So thank you to everyone who is a member. And for those who are thinking about becoming a member, we thank you for thinking about it and ask you to click that join button and go ahead and do so. And it is so appreciated, and hopefully you'll find it beneficial to you as well. So thank you so much. We'll see you in a few minutes.